Okay, hello everyone. Welcome. My name is Dr. Mariam Nasir Tafrishi, and I am one of the co-chairs of APA Division 52 Human Rights, Peace, and Global Wellbeing. And I work closely with our other co-chair, Dr. Gulzar Ahmad. Dr. Gulzar Ahmad and I would like to thank you for joining us today for this very important presentation about a global issue. The third culture, kids and adults, part 2 of a 3-part series, which is about mental health and wellness across the lifespan. I wanted to welcome and thank our dear guest speakers, Dr. Patricia Perez and Mr. Brandon Kerr, for accepting our invitation to present today, and also, again, accepting to come back to continue this series. I would also like to thank our communication team, our VP, Dr. McGrath, Dr. Gulzar Ahmad, and our team members within our group for all their support. Before introducing our guest speakers, I would like to ask if you can all mute yourselves. So when the speakers talk, there's no background noises. Thank you. Our presenters are open to accept any questions you have, which you may type it in the Q&A section of Zoom or in the comment section. You can try both just in case one of them doesn't work. Try the Q&A first, please. And then as they're speaking, they're going to ask if anybody has a question, and you can unmute yourself and ask the question, or if you have typed it, we can ask those questions from them. This webinar is going to be about an hour and 10 minutes. And at the end of the presentation, Dr. Gulzar Ahmad, will thank our presenters, connect the presentation to the work that we do at the Human Rights, Peace, and Global Wellbeing Division of APA Division 52, and we will just thank everybody. After the third series is done, we're gonna at some point have a panel discussion, which we will present the flyer later to you. Okay, so introducing our first presenter, Dr. Patricia Perez is an adjunct faculty, Department of Psychology at Adler University, Chicago. For almost 30 years, she has taught undergraduate and graduate courses in child development and psychology. Some of our areas of research and practice expertise include mental health and wellness, children and families, international programming and education, career development, life coaching, child abuse and neglect, global mobility and migration, and third culture kids and adults. Dr. Perez is an international psychologist, psychotherapist, and global consultant and speaker. Mr. Brandon Kerr is a lecturer at Kingsborough Community College, part of New York's CUNY system. He has spent the better part of his adult life living abroad, 4 years in South Korea, 4 years in Turkey, and several months in Armenia studying Russian language. Mr. Kerr is currently a PhD candidate, congratulations, in international psychology at the Chicago School. His dissertation research examines foreign language anxiety and how it affects social acculturation among international students. Please help me welcome our first speaker, Dr. Perez.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tafrishi. We are so thrilled. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so thrilled to be here again. As Dr. Tafrishi mentioned, we are at the part 2 of third culture kids and adults, and we are focusing on mental health and wellness across the lifespan. So before we get started, we would like to thank, again, Dr. Tafrishi for the invitation, Dr. Gulzar, also Dr. McGrath, Brita McGrath, Tatiana, and Raphael for helping us and really inviting us and supporting our work. We would also like to thank Division 52, the Society for Global Psychology, really Human Rights, Peace, and Global Wellbeing which this particular webinar is being hosted. We also would like to thank all of the Third Culture Kids adults. Many here could possibly be, as we continue to learn about TCKAs, and obviously and all of you who are present. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Brandon.
Awesome. Welcome all to everyone. Just going to take you quickly through an overview, or rather roadmap, of what we have coming up today. We'll start with a brief recap of part one, defining what it means to be a TCKA and placing it within the context of global mobility. Then we'll take a look at the key theories in developmental psychology as they apply to TCKs. From there, we'll walk through different developmental milestones of socio-emotional growth, rather. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with practical strategies for supporting TCKs at every life stage. So, a quick introduction rationale. Dr. Tafreshi, she already gave us a beautiful introduction. I just want to talk about why these topics matter to us. For me, I'm the son of a TCKA. My mother is from the island of Barbados. My father is from Jamaica. They both, or rather, my mother moved here when she was a child, and never found a foothold, we could say, in either country. In her home country, Barbados, and here in the United States, there's always a struggle finding that balance, figuring out where home is. For me, this topic is particularly important because it gives me a way to understand her in a deeper meaning. We know that as global mobility increases, and whether that's due to career opportunities and education and other geopolitical factors, that more children are growing up in different cultures with different backgrounds, and they're a lot different than their parents. So while this experience brings incredible opportunities, we know that it presents some unique challenges. So for me, I find that very interesting. Dr. Perez?
Thank you so much, Brandon. So for me, as I mentioned in part one, I am a TCKA and was a TCK originally from Quezon City, Philippines, and I moved every 1 to 5 years. So 5 different states in the United States. By the age of 3, I moved to the United States, then moved to London for pretty much my middle school and high school years. There are some pictures here on this slide. I think we have some friends from the American School in London where I got my high school diploma, and then continue to travel as an international psychologist in my work. So this is really important, and especially this topic, really understanding that just because we've moved to all these places and across a child's life or even adult life, these type of relationships or how we take care of ourselves in the mental health and global spheres is really, really important. All right, back to you, Brandon.
All righty. So we're going to start by giving a recap for those who might be joining us for the first time. When we talk about a third culture kid, it's someone who has spent a significant part of their life or the developmental years outside of their parents or their caregivers' root culture. So the term, it was coined at about 1950 by sociologists John and Ruth Hill Usein. TCKs, they live between 3 cultural spheres. So we can think about it as the first culture, typically their parents' home culture. The second culture, the country where they're raised. And then the third culture would be a mix of, we can say, experiences of that global mobility and that shaping of their identity and their sense of belonging. And for those who continue this global lifestyle into adulthood, they can become third culture adults, TCAs. So in this session, when we say TCKAs, we're referring to both the children and the adults who have these shared experiences. Trish?
Thank you. So as Brandon has mentioned earlier, we are going to be talking about, also based on the fact that this has been being hosted by Division 52 of the American Psychological Association Special Interest Group, that we're going to be looking at this in light of global mobility and obviously development across the lifespan. So when we think about this, When we think about mobility, we know that this has increased over time. People move around even just for tourism. But when we think about migration, need for the world of work, choices, whether it's voluntary or even involuntary, disasters, man-made disasters and natural disasters, many of us as humans, for our rationale of moving, want optimal quality of life. So based on the United Nations, 2020, 272 million people, right, and 31 million continue to move and migrate in different capacities. Also, too, when we think about this topic and think about TCKAs, the original thought based on Ruth Hill and John was their work in looking at missionaries and how they've adjusted and adapted and changed in those settings when they thought about this terminology. But now when we really think and redefine what a TCKA is, we can think about things like generational diversity, whether you are a native or an immigrant in terms of technology usage, and then also countries. So traditionally, we used to think about this in terms of countries and going across borders, but now we can also think about it in these other ways. Right, Brandon.
Mhm. So TCKs, they experience a range of socio-emotional challenges and their unique life circumstances that shape their mental health and well-being. So let's take a closer look at some of these key themes. Here we have a list for you. When we talk about stereotypes of lifestyles, many assume that being a TCK means growing up in luxury or having an exciting or an adventurous life. And while there are some undeniable benefits to globally mobile upbringings, there are some challenges that aren't always visible, such as frequent relocation, cultural displacement, emotional instability, due to that lack of long-term social support. We also talk about mental health as a luxury or a taboo. In some cultures, mental health care it's still stigmatized and it's seen secondary to psychological or physical health. For TCKs, as living in between different cultures, navigating these cultures can be different, and they can have differing views that can make it harder to seek support when they need it. Some may also struggle with the belief that their concerns aren't serious enough to warrant attention compared to their other global issues. We can talk about grief and loss. One of the biggest yet often overlooked aspect of the TCK experience is repetitive grief. So saying goodbye to friends, schools, or even entire cultures over and over again. And this sense of loss can accumulate over time. It makes it harder for them to form those deeper relationships. Um, Sense of home and belonging. We talked about this during our last presentation, the question of where is home? That's common for TCKs. And having lived in multiple places, they often feel both at home everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And this can lead to challenges in forming their stable self-identity. Impacts of relationships. The frequent transitions that these TCKs feel in their upbringing can shape attachment styles and influence interpersonal relationships. So they may develop some strong adaptability and communication skills, while others, they can continue to struggle with trust and long-term commitment. And today's focus will be mostly on developmental and lifetime impacts. So the effects that TCK's upbringing, we know that those don't stop at childhood, that they continue to shape their career choices, their relationships, and even mental health in their adulthood. And that many TCKs find themselves drawn to internationally focused careers, but may also find challenges in establishing their stability. One thing that we did want to know was that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, UNSDG, they do have 17 developing goals, and this really is tied to number 3, the good health and well-being. For those who might be unfamiliar, we're talking about a key global framework that aligns the United States Sustainable Development Goals that are then highlighting some of the issues that we see with this population. Take, for example, One of the targets for number 3 would be to reduce premature mortality from non-communicable diseases through the prevention of treatment and promote mental health and well-being. TCKs, like other global mobile populations, they may face unique stressors that impact their long-term mental health goals. Increased awareness and access to culturally competent mental health supports are essential for them. So we want to really focus on how not only we can help TCKs at a local level, but what it looks like globally, what the United Nations is doing, and what other countries are doing on the individual level. Trish?
Yeah, thank you so much, Brandon. I just wanted to add a couple just orienting points here. So as we mentioned from the last slide, that traditionally this terminology, TCKAs, was really referred to the expatriate population. But now the way that we're looking at it, Brendan and I are looking at it, as we mentioned about voluntary and involuntary populations that continue to move and migrate, that we could look at this in the stereotypes of lifestyles, that we may not have all luxurious lifestyles, but for whatever the reason for quality of life and human rights, that we do move. And all of these things that we're going to be talking about is not just localized for the expatriate population. The other thing too is that when we go through, especially when we go through the overview of developmental psychology in light of TCKAs, thinking about yourselves or thinking about what it will be like to be a person and then now an adult, right? When we think about, in particular, social emotional development, growing up and thinking about all these things as we manage relationships. All right, Brandon?
So to better understand how TCKs develop, we want to look at 3 key psychological frameworks. The first one, attachment theory. John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. Our early relationships, they form blueprints for our future relationships. And we want to ask ourselves, how does frequent relocation affect attachment? It's one of the concepts that we tie to this. Another might be a cultural psychology, coined by John Barry and David Sam. And when we talk about a cultural psychology, it's the process of adapting to new cultures while balancing old ones and how it can shape their identity and their mental health. But most importantly for today, when we talk about lifespan development, Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. From childhood to adulthood, different stages present different or unique psychological tasks, and some of which can be intensified or disrupted when it relates to the TCK experience. Trish?
Yeah, thank you so much. So where it's bolded here are the 2 theories or frameworks, and obviously there's so many more. And we also have to not ignore cultural considerations. So we're just highlighting these 2 to anchor some of our conversation. Right, Brandon.
All righty. So contributing factors. There are several factors that influence how TCKs adapt. We have the age of the move. So we think about early childhood moves and how they impact the development differently than adolescent relocations. Picture it this way. We have a child who may have moved when they were 3 or 4 years old versus a child that may have moved when they're 12 or 13 years old, and how where they are in that stage of development might impact their future outlook. Frequency of moves. We have here frequency, duration, experience, presentation. When we think about the frequency of the moves, moving every year versus every few years versus staying in one place for a longer period of time, it can shape differently or shape their identity differently. Developmental milestones we'll talk about in a bit, but support systems, I want to jump there, family dynamics. We're thinking access to therapy. We're thinking cultural sensitivity and how those things may play a role in socio-emotional adjustment. Personal resilience. We can think about how some individuals might thrive with mobility or thrive in mobility, while others struggle with the loss and the disconnection. When we talk about an anchor in the development and milestones, actually, Trish will be talking more about this. Trish, did you want to add to these contributing?
No, I think, yeah, thank you, Brandon. I think we'd like to stop here, Dr. Tafreshi, and just see if anyone has any questions. This was actually just a review from part 1. And then we're going to be moving on to the development across lifespan with TCKAs. But just if anyone had any general questions or comments, we would love to hear that.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting. So in the Q&A, the communication team has answered. Someone was asking, a participant was asking if we are working on providing, if this is a CE, they're going to get a CE for this webinar, which unfortunately not, but that's a great idea, and maybe we can work towards that. Thank you for asking and showing the interest. Let me check the chat. Nothing in the chat. If anybody wants to raise their hand, let me see. Okay. Okay, one participant is mentioning this refresher perfectly encapsulated the info in seminar 1. Thank you. Thank you so much for mentioning
Thank you.
that.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, I'm going to be honest, sometimes it's hard right, Dr. Tafreshi and Brandon and Dr. Gulzar, how much do you say with people who have been following along with us, and then how much do you leave room? So now you get to see sort of my teacher hat for those of you who I've taught here or who know me as a professor, because this is just one of my loves. I just love the field. Now we're going to be shifting here. We talked a lot up to this point about the context of TCKAs. Now we're going to add developmental psychology. So we could think about this. Other words of developmental psychology is lifespan psychology or human development. I'm going to be defining and talking about developmental periods and domains, developmental milestones. We already talked about those contributing factors, and I might say a couple more things about why we've chosen attachment theory and Erik Erikson in light of mental health and wellness for the TCKA population. So I'm going to start back up in the red up there on the top of the definition, so we can all be on the same page when we think about this from a psychological point of view. So again, this topic or this field of study, right? If any of you have ever taken like an intro to psychology class, right? Then you can add to your knowledge with a subdiscipline, which is either developmental psychology, lifespan psychology, or human development. So when we think about the lifespan or that word, the way that I like to define it, it's a chronological review of someone's life, of a human. When we think about the definition for psychology, the way that I like to tell people about this is thinking, feeling, and behaving. And in this particular presentation, it is across the lifespan, it's with TCKAs, and it's global. Moving forward, the definition for the development then is I've extended it not just to change over time, and that is key, right? Over time, which is our lifespan, chronologically at least. It is also stability, maintenance, and change and growth over time. So it's stability, maintenance, growth, and change over time. And you might see that as we move forward in this discussion. What is a developmental period? The developmental period is the period of life chronologically. So we are going to be starting in this conversation with infants and toddlers, which is 0 to 3. We're then going to be moving forward to the early childhood stage, which is roughly around 2 or 3 to 6. Then we have middle to late adulthood, which is 6 to 11. The adolescent period has been extended now in the literature from 11 to 20. Young adulthood is now 20 to 40 years of age. Then we have middle adulthood, which is 40 to 60. And then late adulthood is from 60 plus and beyond. Okay, so those would be the developmental periods that we're going to be looking at chronologically across the lifespan. So what are the developmental domains? We have physical development, right? So that's our body. That is our height, weight, and body mass index. We have motor development, which is large motor and fine motor skills. which is large muscles and small muscles, we have cognitive development. Okay, so cognitive development can be defined as the brain, our thoughts, expressive and receptive language. And then the last domain is social emotional development, which is what we're really going to be focusing on here in this presentation, is understanding feelings, expressing feelings, and the social part, right? So that's emotional. The social part then is really looking at our engagement and interaction with people, place, and things. I know this is a mouthful. It's a lot. All right. So when we look at developmental milestones now, milestones typically, and again, there's a lot of contributing factors, including our culture and some of the things that we wrote down of those contributing factors. Developmental milestones then can be defined as what we're supposed to be doing based on our age during that period of life. So for example, some developmental milestones, at least here in the United States, when you're 5 years old, you go to kindergarten. Okay, that would be a typical milestone that this is what's expected of you, right? In other parts of the world, right, maybe 5 years old is not a developmental milestone or something that's expected of you. So I'm going to pass on and move forward with the contributing factors, which we talked about already. We might talk about that later in some conversations if you have any questions. But the two theories that we're going to be focusing on is attachment theory, as Brandon has mentioned, really looking at, and the reason why we thought about this is that, as Brandon mentioned, that imprinting and those attachments to people, place, and things, whether it's secure or insecure, has implications in our adult relationships. Okay, there is such a thing called an adult attachment inventory, which you can all look up and see for yourself. I mean, some of them are verified and some of them aren't. We are also going to be talking a little bit about and applying Erikson's psychosocial theory. There are 8 stages that go from trusting someone at the very early stages to then really wanting to have a legacy. All right, does anyone have questions? I know that was a lot for one slide as we move forward now to really looking at some of these developmental milestones across the ages.
So let's see, as I check, nothing in the chat box, nothing in the Q&A. If anybody wants to raise a hand, I just, while we give a few seconds of time to see if anybody is writing something or raising a hand, I wanted to thank both of you. This is very needed, detailed. So I really appreciate this. Thank you so much that you're presenting the information that I think all of us wanted, and we couldn't get all of it at the same place. So really appreciate what you have created here for today.
Well, I mean, again, I'm going to say this as someone who's taught this class on a master's, undergrad, and doctoral levels. And as you can see from just the last slide, I've done this quite many times, and I always get excited about it. I think that a lot, and thank you so much for allowing us to do this. I think much, at least for me, I don't know about Brandon, but for me, a lot of this development of thinking about TCKAs and the lifespan and mental health really came out of COVID. And I remember, and I don't know if some of my American School in London friends out there, I started connecting with a lot of my TCKA friends on social media. And then it got to a point where we started talking about our mental health, not just during COVID, but also during the fact that how are we maintaining our relationships and reflecting. We've had a lot of time at home reflecting on our lives and thinking about, who's part of our inner circle? How did our life as a TCKA or TCK actually affect us now? And then I thought to myself, oh my goodness, we can combine all these things together. And I wonder if anyone wants to hear it.
Definitely. Thank you so much. There's one question, actually a comment. Andrea Lozano mentioned, thanks for clarifying the updated developmental stages. Oh, let's see. I think, okay. Is the literature divided by using TCKA and ATCKs?
Yeah, so Okay, can you say that question again?
Is the literature divided by using TCK/A's and ATCK?
Yeah, so I guess depending on, in our review of the literature, there's some differences in that. Some people just do work on just TCK. Some people traditionally put the A there because the K, the kid, becomes an adult. So then there's also just an adult, right, who's a third culture, who has spent predominantly most of their years as an adult away from their passport culture, right? They have decided, right, to either change their passport or decided to live somewhere else. And so those are all the different ways of looking at it. And so the way that we've defined it is based on what we've looked at. And so because of both Brandon's and my background, we're calling it TCKAs, and so we've defined it in that way. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. That's it for now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so we have a couple tables now, and again, this is just a lot of information, but we're now going to be linking the developmental milestones across the developmental periods. Okay, so if you could see on the left-hand side, as I mentioned to you before, what those developmental periods are. And for those of you, I think the first comment, the reason why they've been extended, because from a global space, the milestones that were expected in certain generations have now shifted. So for example, many adults aren't leaving the house, aren't leaving the nest until much later, and they get their jobs much later for whatever the reason is. Okay, whether it's a developing country or a developed country. So that's the reason why they've been extended, because there's just a lot of reasons, a lot of factors that are not present, that's present now that wasn't present in the past. I hope that makes sense. On the right-hand side are some of the milestones. So what we're looking at here is what we're supposed to be doing in general, barring individual differences during these ages. Okay, so when we're thinking about this, right, we're not even thinking about this based on TCKAs. This is just in general, children and adults, that if you're in the 0 to 3, roughly, your task or the caregiver's task as a milestone, you should have, or at least your caregiver should have been there for you, right, as a secure base, or you have bonded in a secure attachment. What does this mean? And again, this is a whole nother presentation, that your caregivers or people, place, and things around you have been predictable, have been consistent, have been secure, and have provided safety. Okay, so start thinking about a TCKA. Providing that attachment, that goes into really around young adulthood and identity formation in the adolescent years. The second thing that's really, really important is the idea of object permanence. Okay, so around 12 to 18 months, children around this time, in this age group, know that something is out there and exists out there, right? It's very abstract, exists out there without having to feel it, touch it, and see it. Okay, so an apple exists out there, mommy exists out there without having mommy right in front of you. All right, the other thing too is that this is the beginning of expressions. You see a baby smile, they smile, you smile back, right? You're trying, and so you can imagine that caregivers and people who are around this child, or even people, place, and things, that they could, young children can feel you, can also start expressing what you're expressing in echolalia, or also they repeat everything you say. As we move forward to the early childhood years, when they start going to school, they want to do things on their own. They want to be autonomous, right? So the first stage for 0 to 3 through Erik Erikson is trust versus mistrust. The second one now is autonomy versus shame and doubt. They start separating from their caregivers. They start going to school. They want to own something, because by the time they get down to the middle to late childhood years, they want to be contributors. They want to initiate. That's the next stage for Erik Erikson. They want to know that they have some meaning making in their society. Peers start playing more of a role. Obviously, family is still there, but they're spending more time in school and learning what they're good at. By the time they're teens, physically, motorically, they are shifting from being a child to an adult. Peers take center stage. Obviously, their family influences still, but their friends become very, very important. They start understanding what it means to build relationships outside of the family system, and they start building their identity. All along, we're building identity, but now we're building identity in terms of what does this mean when I become an adult. The young adulthood years then are things like focusing on all types of intimacy, physical intimacy, sexual intimacy, emotional intimacy, all types of intimacy, potentially becoming partnered, dating, married, all of these things, relationships, building relationships outside of the home, maintaining those relationships inside of the home, and really setting the stage for an adult attachment that circles back from secure attachment in the 0 to 3 years. So this stage, based on Erik Erikson, is focused on intimacy. Middle adulthood, I don't know if any of you have heard of the sandwich generation. I don't know. Dr. Tafreshi, Brandon, anyone, Dr. Gulzar, have you heard of this?
No, but I have felt it, if that counts.
Yes,
So I was very
yes.
happy to see it exist.
Yeah. So I mean, whether we like sandwiches or not, I'm a fan of a panini. But anyway, the sandwich generation means we, in the middle adulthood generation, are in the middle of, on one end, we're caring for children, maybe, we're teachers, or we're supporting the younger generation, whether you have children or not. And on the other end, we may be caring for our aging parents. We may be looking forward to the future. So we have a lot of roles and responsibilities. The middle adulthood years have a lot of responsibilities. You've probably heard about the midlife crisis, right? Which I don't really see as necessarily a crisis. It's really more of, we are trying to figure out some of these life transitions, and we start building memories, knowing by late adulthood that some of our friends, families, and loved ones are going to be dying. We are going to be left behind. We are then experience grief and loss, and we are forming what, starting in middle adulthood or even across the lifespan, a life review. We're looking at our life and seeing what's going on. All right, so now this is the next slide. Now I'm going to show you, based on what I just said, and what I just said in that slide was really focused on what is supposed to happen. Like if you're in a typical developmental trajectory, obviously there's cultural things and individual differences. We should have attained, and also barring any disorders or mental health conditions or any physical ailments and things like that, we should have been doing all of these things within our communities. However, when you're a TCK and a TCKA across the lifespan, some of those things may not happen when we think about our interaction with people, places, and things, which is social development, and how we express our feelings and understand our feelings, which is emotional development. So here are some strategies of how to get, based on the developmental period, to those developmental milestones. Does that make sense?
Trish, can I add something real quick?
Yeah.
Just can you go back to the last slide?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So just for those who may not have a psychological background, when we're trying to figure out how these developmental periods might relate to the topic that we have today, we would want to think about it through, with each of these stages. Pretty much these are all developmental or task, and we know that TCKs, there can often experience these things through a global lens. So if we think about early childhood, we'll take it from 0 up to 6. Secure attachment might be challenged by frequent moves or cultural shifts. You're trying to attach to these things, but you're constantly moving around. So finding those attachments with friends, finding those attachments that might be with family that you started with in one country that are no longer there in another country, those would be things to consider. When we think about adolescence at 11 to 20, while you're going through identity formation there. But for TCKAs, it can be a struggle between multiple cultural influences. Imagine that you're trying to find your identity within one particular cultural group where there are one set of values, one set of standards, one set of behaviors, and then you're shifted into another one. And as you're trying to figure out who you are, this is getting pulled in other directions. When you get to that adulthood, Dr. Perez was talking about intimacy and career decisions, and that might shape, or rather be shaped by your global upbringing, the type of work that you want to do, what intimacy might look like for you. So when we talk about, as we go into these strategies, those are some of the problems that we want to consider through the lens of a TCKA. Where in those developmental stages was there a pivot? Was there something that, because of that moving around, that things might not have developed the way that would fit into the, I'll say, quote unquote, norm of social emotional development?
Yes, thank you, Brandon, for breaking that down. And you also do, everyone realizes that norm is all very relative, right? What consider normal and typical. And so, the other thing we need to think about, if we're talking about it from a psychological aspect, it is really building our sense of self. So as a TCKAs, as Brandon was talking about, all of those frequent moves, all those different environments, all those different engagements with people, whether it's voluntary or involuntary. Like in my case, it was involuntary because of my dad's job. We were moved every 1 to 5 years. So I had 18 different addresses by the time I was 18 years old that I had to really adapt and change. For some of my peers, they decided they weren't going to build any relationships at all. So the two things that we need to think about when we move on to strategies is, number one, how are TCKAs building their sense of self? And how are we, number two then, and how do we build relationships with others? Which affects, those two things affects everything that we do. Our personal relationships, our professional relationships, our choices, and anything that we do, and how we view ourselves. So I know, again, this is all like very much of a snapshot. So just going through some of this, knowing that we need to be mindful of time, that again, on the left-hand side is the developmental period, but here are some strategies. So a lot of people think just because children are young, there's no way of getting them to feel that predictability, feel that safety, feel that consistency, right? Feel that secure sense of self. And then because they feel secure in their sense of self, emerging sense of self, they can go out in the world and do all these things. So it starts from birth. Okay, so I'm also an early interventionist. I do work with 0 to 3, and a lot of people don't know a lot about that, but we believe that because we could start this way and it builds neural pathways in our brain, this then becomes patterns of our behavior. So if you can look at the 0 to 3 stage, pictures, because they're very sensory at this time, a transitional object. So a transitional object might be, say, for example, the dad or the parents are away looking for a home somewhere, and you're going to be leaving your child behind. The transitional object could be a shirt with a smell of their parent, okay? Because they are operating from their senses. If we move forward, when they start school, and this could go all along here, that there is alignment of communication of what is going to happen with these moves, what to expect between school and between home. Why is this important? Because most of us like control. Most of us like to know what's going to happen. So this then becomes, because remember, they like to be autonomous at this age, that you can start including them in having projects on things like saying goodbye to their friends, right? What's going to happen on the last day of school? But everybody's in communication. As we move forward, when they really get into school and they have that, you are building in routines. So say, for example, I knew that there is a possibility that we're going to move because of my dad's job. My dad would talk about it. Our dinner time was when we would talk about these things. And we also knew that a dinner is when my dad would announce if we were going to move. Okay. That became a routine, for good or bad. So the other thing too was that because these routines keep on shifting and these locations keep on shifting, people, place, and things, that we could also, our sense of self could be shifted because we don't know, right? We don't know at any given time, okay, now I'm living in Texas, now I'm living in London, now I'm living in New York City. How am I going to be contributing to myself and anybody else in school or in our communities? As we move forward now to the teen years, again, very similar to school and home alignment, this is the time when they're shifting from child to an adult, that sense of longing for home and belonging. Because if a child starts moving, in my case, when I was 3 years old, they are now trying to figure out, what, if I'm an adult and maybe I have choices by the time I turn 18, maybe I don't want this lifestyle. Maybe I don't want this because this doesn't give me stability at all. Or you know what? Maybe I don't want to be in an intimate relationship with anybody because this was just too painful. So this then becomes that idea of building, right? Building all of those things as we move on to adult attachment, and whether that's sustained or not sustained or revisited now as we decide and really look at ourselves and look at how we build relationships over time. Middle adulthood and late adulthood, I think I shared that the reason why this was really important to me is that I had a lot of time to think in middle adulthood. That's my generation now. And thinking during COVID of what is going on. And so now we have memories, right? We think about our memories. We think about whether or not we can remember all these things, forming reunions or pocket of reunions and looking through a life review. Same with late adulthood. As we deteriorate, right? As we deteriorate in our faculties potentially, that some of the strategies to keep some of these things alive and move towards those developmental milestones and review whether grief and loss or whether we're done with that, right? We're done with that, and we are okay with what is going on. It's okay that we moved. It's okay that we had these type of relationships, for good or bad, that we have sustained those memories. And again, we go back to when we were young with those transitional objects of seeing a photograph, smelling something, right? Like for me, when I think of when I think about looking at picture of Highgate where I lived in London, when I think about the smells and sights and sounds of New York City, I have those memories. All right, I'm going to stop here. I know that was a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a lot.
So we have two questions.
Yeah.
Can cultural adaptability compensate for insecure attachment?
Yeah, I would have to know more about that. That is really a big question. Yeah, I mean, it could be, but then you are externally facing, you're not internally from a, I am also a psychotherapist, that the cultural adaptation could be just very more like a knowledge base, like you're surviving every day in the culture, whatever, but that may not necessarily look at you. Yes, you are adapting to culture, but you're not looking at relationships. You're not looking at yourself, right? With people, place, and things, and wondering, why do you do what you do? Why do you, in insecure attachments, avoid people, run away, build relationships with the same type of people that maybe are toxic, or maybe you have maybe you have a secure attachment. But I mean, the current literature on attachment, there's a book called Attached on modern dating and love, where the goal now is not to have a secure attachment like a developmental milestone, but to understand what your attachment style is, so that whoever is in your circle in relationships, that they know and so that they can adapt. I don't know if I answered that question at all, but
I think
it's very nuanced, that question, I would say.
that one thing that we want to be careful of is saying that anything can compensate for secure attachment. It might shroud it, it might cover it. But cultural adaptability, I would say that's a pro. That's something we could add to our toolbox. That can be something that can be used as a it's almost like cold medicine. It doesn't actually get rid of the cold. It'll cover the symptoms. So we want to be careful when we talk about compensating for insecure attachment. If anything, it might mitigate some of the behaviors or how it might look or how it might present. Sorry if I keep looking over here, my screen's over here too. It might mitigate how it presents to people, but I wouldn't say it compensates for it.
Yeah, so thank you, Brenda. So here's another example. So I told you a little bit about my life, right? So here would be an example of maybe, me knowing about all these cultures, traveling to all these places, that I decide that instead of taking care of my husband and my family or being part of my family system, I'm just flying all over the place without any mind of communicating with my family, whether this means anything to them or not, because I'm seeking knowledge of culture and other places. And yeah, I'm adapting to these cultures and doing all this work. But in my primary relationships, I'm not understanding what it means to give them safety, security, predictability. I just do whatever I want to do. I just go off and do whatever I want to do without consulting them. And I know people who do that, right? Who've had this type of lifestyle because, like, you know what? So they're actually compensating for what they would have wanted, in their life where they had a little bit more control, but they didn't. So what are they doing? They're reacting. So what we're talking about too is prevention.
And then Dr. Perez, so you were mentioning that then for people to find other people that kind of can feed their need of attachment style. Is that correct? And they can feed the needs of the people that are there in the relationship. Is that right? Like giving importance, curiosity, and
Yes.
like a nice give and take.
Yeah. So a developmental milestone for if we believe in secure attachment is you have a sense for yourself before you actually enter a relationship with somebody else. Or some of us actually enter relationships for the chaos potentially that we were, how we lived as TCKAs. Okay. And then we create that pattern again as adults. So we are seeking security, predictability, safety, and security, just like a 0 to 3, just like an infant toddler. So what I'm also saying is that being a TCKA in any form can be a spectrum of how we don't feel secure, we don't feel safe, we don't have predictability, right? And we don't have consistency. And across the lifespan, there are ways to do that. But as an adult, we then, many of us have that cognitive and emotional, social emotional capacity to be able to turn that around.
That's correct. To pick and choose. Thank you.
To pick and choose, but you have to be aware based on your TCKA, right? And your own mental health and the impact of that lifestyle.
Thank you so much for the clarity you created, both of you. Thank you. The other question is, what are the best ways to maintain healthy mental well-being as a TCK adult with constant change?
Okay, so I think the strategies that we mentioned, let me go back here. Oops. Uh-oh. I just clicked on. Okay, I think the strategies are, okay, I'm not going to click on anything right now. The strategies that we talked about. So as an adult, I think really understanding, for example, if you're a young adult and you're in your first relationship or something like that, you need to think about, okay, why am I picking this person, right? Why am I choosing this person? Why am I engaging? And really understanding your gut feeling and reviewing all the relationships, maybe lack of relationships you had when you were moving around to all of these places and that impact. As you move forward to middle adulthood, right? And we're looking in late adulthood, some people circle around. Some people have ignored some of those relationships because it was just way too painful. So sometimes actually talking to a peer, really at any stage, and reconnecting with people and having like a little group to have those conversations of what that time in your life meant to you actually can be very healing.
Looking at the positive sides of it, kind of nourishing with that. Thank you. So another question is, when would you say meaning enters the lifespan? I ask because events in my childhood that I did not see as meaningful at the time became more meaningful over time. I'm assuming you would say this is at least in middle age adulthood. So when would you say meaning enters the lifespan?
Meaning starts from day one, but we don't remember meaning when we're 6 months. Most of us don't remember from cognitive development, don't remember anything really before like 2. Okay. Some of us may have visual memories like of a balloon, like my husband has this memory of a balloon raising up or whatever, but most of us, so there is meaning. It's in that life review that you remember and piece together all of those things. So I remember being 9 years old and moving from Texas to Oklahoma, and there was meaning there because I wrote that move for my college essay. So there is meaning across the lifespan as early as you remember.
Mhm. And then I think the clarification was she mentioned that I asked because events in my childhood that, and we know sometimes kids don't attach a meaning much to something. They remember it, but then later in life, it's a
Yes.
precious meaning. So,
Yes.
and so that would be in the middle age adulthood, you think?
Yes,
Is that the
you
time?
could. Yeah, you could. It depends on how deep thinker you are. Some people actually think about these things. I'm that type of person. I journal, I write, and I find meaning in everything. So it really depends. But yes, typically, if you're adults, life review, you could do this in middle adulthood.
Just so I
Thank
understand the question, we want to know, Matthew is asking, when do we start thinking about the meaning of things, or when do things start having meaning?
I think
Yeah,
when
I think it's the former, right? When do we start attaching meaning to the
no,
different
enters it like
about
thinking
the
about, yes,
yeah, you
okay,
could
I
do it
think
any, yeah,
Matthew,
yeah.
thinking
yeah.
about the
Hi,
meaning of
Matthew.
things.
Hi, Matthew. You could do it anytime.
Yeah, I think it depends on what's happening in your life and when those things need to have a meaning. I've recently in my family have now been thinking about things that happened 30, 35 years ago that as a child I never really considered. And now I'm getting new information from family. Oh, well, this happened. And I'm saying to myself, oh, well, that makes sense. That explains why I did this as a child, or why this happened. Uh, but I think that there has to be something happening in your life presently that you would need to have that meaning. We tend to ignore the meaning of something until we actually feel like we have a need to understand it, if that
Yeah,
makes
like
sense.
a life event. Like if there's a
Yeah.
significant life event, right?
Mhm.
Like there's a death, right? You're moving again. Someone reminds you of something, right? Or a memory, then that there might be more meaning to this. And I know that Dr. Gulzar is here because he's
Yes.
probably going to be doing the closing, but Dr. Gulzar, I don't know, Brandon, if you just want to quickly say something about this slide and
Yeah.
provide the slide in the textbook in the chat.
I will do both.
Yes.
So on the resources that we have here, we have a lot of great resources for you guys. Um, First, we have Megan Norton. So Megan Norton, she's an
Yes.
intercultural communication trainer. So we are leaving information for you to go and see her website to read more about the information that she has out. Ruth Van Ryken. She has her website as well as a book in its third edition, Third Culture Kids. We're going to leave a link for you to be able to access that as well. I know, Dr. Gulzar, I'm rushing through this.
Yes.
I got you.
Yes. And it is already written there. Everybody can see it, I think. You have very well
Yeah.
explained.
Okay.
Did I
First
put it?
of all,
Did I already
yes.
put it in the chat? I'll throw it in
Yeah,
the
if you put it in the chat, and so yeah, and these are our references, and this is our contact.
And this whole webinar recording would be put up in our website as well of the Division 52 on this special interest group, which is known as Human Rights, Peace, and Global Wellbeing, right? And everybody can have a look at that one again. So first of all, I would like to congratulate Dr. Perez and Brendan Kerr for giving a very good presentation on this subject matter. I remember when I had been teaching this course for a long time in the course of developmental psychology in universities. This subject matter was not included in most of the books. I couldn't find it. Later on, maybe in the you can say earlier uh, 10 or 20 years, this subject is being discussed appropriately. And it is very good point that you have brought into light. And it is well known that this is very important issue all over the world. Because of the fact that the migration of the people is going on, and it is a continuous phenomenon, and which will linger on for a longer period of time in our life because of various reasons. Especially, we can see that this process of globalization and people's mobility, especially in North America, United States, Canada, and in Australia. I remember in some of the continents when I've traveled, people were discussing many issues like that. But this term was not very much familiar to me. But people are showing that they have anxieties and depressions, and they have many psychological problems with them because they have been migrated from different areas of uh, different geographical locations, and they were actually having a cultural shock, cultural trauma, or you can say feelings of alienation, identity crisis. Just that has been mentioned by Jean-Paul Sartre, and sort of you can say existentialism as well, existential crisis as well. So these things have been going on, and it is a very good point that you have both of the scholars have brought it up. So further, as you have explained it very well in your presentation, the process of you can say the cultural processes like first of all, I remember a long time ago when I was a student, I was studying sociology. I read it by Ogburn and Minkoff, great sociologist, and later on, as you mentioned, John Barry and David Sam. Uh, the cultural processes are not so easy. They are not easily adaptable. It takes a long time and take long time of adjustment as well. For example, they have mentioned process of accommodation, acculturation, and assimilation. So that may go into some generations on and on. And people need the adjustment processes. For this adjustment processes, they might develop some difficulties, especially the maladjustment, anxieties, and depressions, etc. So this gives an avenue that we need to open and make aware the societies and the families that there is a dire need of counseling sessions for those people around. So it is not only the counseling for the common people, but counseling for the TCKs as well, which is very serious issue. And most of the people in United States, Canada, and Australia are the immigrant people. They do have cultural issues and they do have maladjustment issues with them. So I think that this is a very important stage, and you have very much elaborated that when the family or the children are shifted to another place, when they come across the varieties of cultures, how they adjust. For example, even within a family, the people are different developmental stages. So they might have different perceptions and different levels of difficulties. So this means there might be some possibility of conflicts and tensions arising within the family system as well. So this gives another area to need to be explored, that conflicts and tensions may arise within the family as well, while they are already having some conflicts or different sort of perceptions and tensions with the community or the country living around with them. So this gives again an idea for me that how we can talk about mental health and well-being is that I suggest, this is my perception, that we, in addition to counseling sessions over there, we need to educate the people like this with multicultural education, not only with the immigrant people, but also the local communities, that how we should respect different cultures. This is very important issues, and they need to understand the pros and cons and ups and downs and east and west of every culture. So this is very important, and in addition to multicultural education, I think that there should be a course which I am also thinking about to prepare it, for the respect for diversity, which is the dire need of today in our world around. We need respect for human rights, and we need peace, and we need global well-being. And this is also the name of our group we have created. We need overall health. This is a sustainable development goal as well. So respect for diversity is the main thing, respect for human rights, rather respect for humanity. So I know that there is a very common fear known as xenophobia. So every community is afraid of who the people have come over here. And the people who have shifted, they have also the fear how we shall be adjusted over there. So this is very serious issue that you have brought into limelight that must be addressed. So I repeat it again. So we need counseling, we need family counseling, we need community counseling, we need national counseling about the TCKs, as well as we need to educate the people with respect for diversity, human rights, humanity, peace, and global well-being. Thank you again, and
Thank you.
for giving a very good presentation. And Dr. Tafrishi also gave a very good
Thank you.
roundabout of this program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
And
so much.
I like to kind of reflect on what you said and what Dr. Perez and Brandon said. Yes, we need, as you mentioned, we need counseling, and we need really, as you mentioned, in different places. As think preventatively, we need education, and schools, international schools, organizations, companies, maybe immigration system, when they're moving people or they know people are moving, kind of educate those families about their stages, as Dr. Perez and Brandon was saying, being aware of those stages, how can, things that can happen, the shifts, the changes, the greatness, but the challenges, and how to be prepared, is it a time to use the sensory to create routines? Is it about attachment? What is it? Those are the human strengths and tools that we have that we can use. Some of the most successful schools that I have seen were the international schools, that this education was given to the teachers, administration, and the children. For example, they learned that when new kids are coming, everybody was ready to welcome. Everybody, they would go, let's say, color the cubbies of those kids. They would have 2-3 support system, the buddies of those new kids. We would actually give our names, being a TCKA myself, introduce our names as families who would support other family members. Welcoming is so important. It's like, I recognize your existence, I appreciate your existence, regardless of any similarities or differences we have, so we can kind of support each other's health and nourish those attachments as well. So thank you so much for all of that.
That's right. Great.
Okay, any final sentence, Dr. Perez and Brandon?
Saw that in the chat. I agree with you, Andrea. We do need to do more to educate folks. One of those strategies that Dr. Perez was talking about, one thing that we can do, especially as adult, is offer mentorships and offer community for young adults and people who are still getting into that part of adult life or their independent lives. I don't know if you guys also saw that Dr. Gagnon, Matthew, he put in a podcast that he has on TCKAs. I don't know if everybody in the group is able to see everything I put in the chat. I think it might be only available for the hosts and panelists. But at the end of our presentation, there are links there. So when you get that, but something to think about also, TCK Research Podcast. That was the name of YouTube. Thank you, Matthew.
Additionally, there is a small
Thank you.
point that, there is also, you can say, the negative propaganda against different communities sometimes, like hate speeches should be banned. And as you, Dr. Tapish has also said, and Dr. Perez and Brendan have also said, that we need to educate the people. This is the most important thing. We can call educational interventions are required, rather, everywhere in school and overall in the country. And the media should also play a good role, I think. And the government policies should also be there for the suitable settlement of the people around. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
And Andrea was saying they can see whatever was shared, all the files that were shared in the question and answer. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much, Dr. Perez and Brandon, for presenting the second part of the series. We very, very much look forward to the third part of the series that is going to be in April. I believe it's going to be April 10th, and the flyer is going to be out. And hopefully at another time, we're going to have the panel presentation on this. So thank you again to the communication team and Dr. Golzar and all our guests.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.